May the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the signing of the armistice ended World War I. Today we mark the 100 years, our Remembrance Day to remember the day the guns went silent. I'm using some poetic license in this talk today. The theme put forward by the Royal Canadian Legion, born out of the ashes of World War I, in combination with Veterans Affairs Canada, is the bells of peace, a remembrance of those who served. Churches have been asked, if possible, to ring the church bells at sundown, a sound to help us and encourage an attitude of peace. The above-mentioned organizations feel that they've been handed a torch of remembrance to hold high and never ever forget the sacrifices made by all vets over the last 100 years in the name of Canada and all Canadians. I've used their work extensively in this talk. I'm not going to ring it 100 times. Please think peace. P-E-A-C-E. Peace. P-E-A-C-E. Peace. In today's reading from Ruth, we hear information about the lineage of Ruth towards King David. Lineage. That will eventually lead us to Jesus Christ himself. Why? Well, if we don't know our history, our stories, and where we be, it's hard to know our identity. To know those things in order to fully be present and to be able to move forward. As many of you may or may not know, I'm an Army brat from an Army family. My grandfather was a soldier in World War I, and my dad was a soldier of World War II and Korea. Then a career soldier, frequently assigned to United Nations peacekeeping throughout the whole world. I lived Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. A lonely soldier, a visitor from across the globe, a friend or a relative of people who Dad had met gosh knows where in the world. We never knew with whom we were going to share a meal, and it was wonderful. Both Dad and Grandpa always stressed, war is not to be glorified, but the sacrifice given by men and women is to be honored, for indeed it provides us with peace and prosperity at a great personal sacrifice. I want to share the story of my grandpa. Likely the story really didn't happen the way I was told, and certainly not the way I remember it. But you know, it's like kind of oral Bible stories. It contains truth and a message. Grandpa Parker came to Canada at the ripe old age of 14. He was an indentured person. He basically came with the clothes on his back, an old tattered blanket, and a worn-out black Bible from Scotland, where he was just an extra mouth to feed, and there really wasn't enough food to go around. Literally, he sold himself into slavery. 4 years to work to pay off his passage. His life he lived was anything but easy. Long, hard hours, heavy work, and sleeping in barns because the animals generated heat to keep him warm, and eating whatever he could scrounge. But you know what? He considered it a privilege. He had been given an opportunity to move to this glorious place, Canada, a place to build a decent life after paying off his debt, a place of hope, peace, opportunity, his promised land. After he became a free man, Grandpa continued to work hard and lived in the northwest of Alberta, in the Peace River district. And he was actually being paid a wage. Thought that was pretty neat. His work was connected with the fur trade, mining, and probably early petroleum, something that would never have happened if he hadn't come to Canada. Then the war broke out. Grandpa P, at the age of 22, walked from the Peace River district to Edmonton, a distance of approximately 400 miles, to enlist and sign up. He felt he owed it to give back. It was fall, and winter was settling in. He became lost and disoriented. He was found by an Indigenous woman. She gave him food and care, saved his life. She helped him with more appropriate clothing and taught him all about pemmican, a flour animal fat mixture with mountain ash berries. When mixed with water, you could wrap it around a stick, cook it over a fire, and guess what? You could live very well on that batter. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I'm sure most of you know that reading from Matthew. Arriving in Edmonton, Grandpa was considered pretty unique. He passed the medical, but he was declined to be a soldier because he stood under 5 feet tall, the bottom limit for being enlisted. Well, the story of his walk got to the officer in charge, who wasn't having any of that. He interceded and made it known that any man that could walk that distance at that time of the year and survive had to be at least 5 feet tall. So his official record put him at 5 feet tall. He really was probably closer to 4 foot 10 and a half, the truth be known. Grandpa became part of the Banties, a special group of very small men who operated the guns that were mounted on the underbelly of the planes. A terrible place to squeeze into. Small, exposed, and dangerous. Near the end of the war, he was shot down and significantly injured, and spent a lot of time in hospital in England. A coincidence? I think not, because that's where he met Grandma P. She was 4 foot 8. And they were married. Then in 1920, he brought my dad, a 6-week-old baby, back to Edmonton to live, and worked for British American, or BA Oil, until he retired. Family rumor has it that he invented the original automatic shutoff valve that prevents gas spilling when you're fueling up your vehicle. An urban legend? Who cares? I'm buying the story. Grandpa didn't talk much about the war, but often said he hoped it would never, ever, ever be necessary for anyone to go to bloody, useless war again. Despite his war-related disability, he never complained and was a very positive, determined, yet quiet and humble gentleman. He loved family and country and believed that he owed it to his family and to Canada to be a productive, committed citizen. He wanted everyone to live in peace. Our gospel reading today tells us about some scribes wanting to get lots of attention and to be honored in the marketplaces. They wanted fame by stealing widows' houses and fortune. This puts me in mind of powerful dictators and elitist world leaders who see the end product of war as producing powerful armaments, building personal power, prestige, influence, and economic gain for their own sake. And while using the economy of fear, propaganda, and lies, and other people as pawns, collateral damage. This is such a contrast to the vets who quietly went about doing what was right to help protect their country, neighbor, and their way of life. They signed up without fanfare, not to impress anyone or gain anything. Signing up, it was its own purpose. Recently at a conference and over lunch, I was sitting with some people I really didn't know. The woman beside me asked why I was wearing a poppy. She remarked that she didn't know why we celebrated the glory of war. I was caught off guard, as I remembered November the 11th, not as a celebration, something quite different. I see it as a time of remembrance, of honor, and thanking the men and women who suffered so that I could be sitting here in this church, free to practice my own religion and to discuss the merits of a democratic Canadian society. We had a very deep conversation about differences. From kids having the day off, she truly believed the kids had the day off so they could just spend the time at the mall, to being in school with an organized service, which of course is what happens, to the reason people march at the cenotaph, to vets being bused to the site where they could be in attendance. She saw it all as the strength of war. I see it as a time of remembrance, a show of support, a way to build and rekindle relationships, and a time to say thank you to the vets and families who've given so much their health, their time, their way of life. And in the pursuit of peace and a better way, a time to remember our history and our identity in hopes that we can learn to live in the present so that we can go forward in a different way. This was a great test of beliefs, likely shaped by my grandpa and my dad. And I must say, it felt good to be able to say what I truly believed. It gave me pause, though, that this other person saw things so differently. Just as an FYI, my tongue's a lot shorter. I really had to bite it so that I wouldn't say what I really felt and that I could listen to her and not attack her. Suddenly, another woman across the table, I guesstimate she was about 40-ish, who'd been listening attentively, said, "I'm a recent vet. I served overseas, and I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I recently retired. And I want you to know the words, 'We stand on guard for thee,' are the reason I joined, and the reason I stayed." She almost cried as she expressed the gratitude for the comment she'd heard, knowing that people do appreciate her sacrifice, and by connection, the sacrifice of her family and her friends. She indicated that this knowledge, based on her hearing our conversation, she felt was going to help her move forward. The First Lady, after talking to this younger vet, began to think, and she plans to rethink her views on Remembrance Day of thanking vets for their service and sacrifice, something she thought was long past and outdated. Like the poor widow that put everything she had in the plate, not knowing what would come next, she trusted that that was the right thing to do. Despite any personal possibilities of hardship and suffering she would experience for doing such a brave act. It was all she had to live on. The vets put everything, including their very lives, at personal risk and suffering. Jesus said, no greater love has no man than to lay down his life for his friends. Theologian Henry Nouwen indicates that Jesus' invitation to lay down one's life for others is more than just physical. Those words are an invitation to let one's own life struggles, doubts, fears, joys, pains, and moments of ecstasy be available to others as a source of consolation and of healing. When vets, their descendants, and all those they love and trust can discuss, share stories, experiences, and spend time together with fellow Canadians, young and old, this can only support healing and understanding for both the teller and the listener. A living history and a true sense of identity, to know who we really are, beloved children of God. Another possibility, as suggested by Bill's favorite theologian, David Luce, about the widow, is that she was specifically noticed by Jesus. Despite the fact that she was just part of a large crowd, Jesus really, really saw her. And maybe we're being called to notice our vets and to ensure that they do not become unseen, invisible casualties. We must acknowledge their personhood, their diversity, their needs, and never ever let them be forgotten or overlooked. We need to consciously notice, recognize, and honor their selfless suffering in the name of peace. Remember, Jesus did notice that widow. Richard Rohr, theologian, and one of my favorites, tells us about the Holocaust survivor, respected psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl. He offered guidance for any who suffer. The greatest task for any person is to find meaning in life. Frankl saw three sources of meaning. Work, that's doing anything that's worthwhile and significant. In love, caring for the needs of others. And in courage during very difficult times. Suffering, in and of itself, is meaningless. We give suffering meaning by the way we respond to it. Jesus knew about suffering, the suffering of all those around him, the outcasts, the sinners, the marginalized on the fringes of society. Jesus experienced his own suffering, loss, rejection, betrayal, and physically on the cross, so that we might have life and have it in abundance. This is why he stressed the need of love of neighbor and self, and as Henry Newland tells us, a willingness to let the suffering of our brothers and sisters free us from judgment and condemnation, to give us hearts as gentle and humble as Jesus. Forces beyond control can rob one of everything, with the experience of one thing: how one responds to the situation. While vets, young and old, could not control what happened in life, they can control how they feel. Similarly, while you and I cannot control what happens in our life, we can always control what we feel and what we can do about it. Suffering is a great mystery, a paradox, a mix of pain and suffering and loss. And yet, it has an enduring sense of hope. So while war is not to be celebrating, remembering the suffering of others and the hope for peace, and the ultimate goal that humanity can find a better way beyond the need for war and the repeating of history, each of us can find a better way. A better way that humanity, people from every corner of the world, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, and sexuality, will be treating one another as brothers and sisters. Let it start with each of us. A better way that the sacrifice of our young men and women will no longer be required in bloody, senseless war, as we wear poppies to remember and honor vets, past and present, sharing on the value of peace that our vets hold so dear. A better way that food and resources from every living thing in this world can be provided, an equal sharing of God's bounty. A better way the world of contentment built on faith, trust, truth, and love. We can all be disciples following the ways of Jesus, living his example. A better way, peace throughout the world and in each of our hearts. And now in closing, the bells of peace. And for this I say, thanks be to God. Amen.